Clara, thank you so much for being on the Heyo with Kelsey Moore podcast.
I am excited that we are making this happen, Kelsey. This is our second go around, and we're not going to need a third attempt. This is it.
No, no, today is the day. The internet is working. There's no hurricanes coming at least our way. I think it's
Yep.
good.
Yep. I am excited for a conversation. Yeah. Wonderful.
Me
So
too.
to connect us.
Absolutely. We have so many positive overlaps. I remember talking a little bit on my own Instagram just about how Christian women specifically view exercise and how, it can be really hard to not get our value rooted in how we look or how we present ourselves. But at the same time, where's the balance of wanting to maintain a really healthy lifestyle? And I was just talking to you about this kind of off air, but I feel like you do such a good job with that on Instagram. You come across as so authentic, so genuine, so warm hearted. And I just want to talk to you about that today. So thanks for coming on.
Of course.
So you're a dietitian by trade. So kind of give us a 5-second snippet of your background education wise, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So I've been a dietitian since 2016. It's funny. I learned about the world of nutrition in high school. I was an athlete. I did cheerleading and tennis. And I just remember learning about wow, food can fuel me and help me feel better and perform better. But I really didn't know that dietetics and nutrition could be a career. Um, and then I went off to college, changed my major 4 different times, all in the health field, and then finally landed on dietetics because it was so nutrition focused, where everything else that I had done before was just kind of general health promotion. Um, and yeah, really enjoyed it. It was a lot of work in terms of studying for organic chemistry and biochemistry and all of these sciencey classes that I was like, I don't think I can do that. But yeah, I've been a dietitian since 2016, and worked in a clinical setting at a hospital for 5 years. Have my own private practice now, and then I work at a direct primary care clinic a couple days a week, with kind of a more preventative approach. So that's kind of, I guess a very short snippet of what I do now as a dietitian. And then in 2020, got my personal training certification through NASM because I've always loved fitness and being active. I grew up an athlete, always in some kind of sport or activity, and I just love moving. And so I knew I wanted to kind of tie that in some way.
Absolutely. And I think there will always be an overlap. Dietitians will always have questions of exercise from their clients and patients, and strength coaches or personal trainers will always have questions coming about food and nutrition. So I think as a clinician or as a professional, we should be well rounded, and I think those fields overlap anyways. So I'm so glad, and that's so cool that you decided to get your personal training license certification. So what made you spur on to go work for yourself through Redemptive Health?
It's actually kind of a funny story. Doesn't every story start out like that? So in
Mhm.
college, I ironically was a nutrition major and did not really know how to cook. I was in, the freshman dorms, had the meal plan. Sophomore year, I lived in a sorority house, so we had a cook. And then junior year came around, and I was in a house with 4 other girls, and I was like, I don't know how to cook anything other than yogurt and oatmeal in a sandwich. And so I actually started a private Instagram account to take pictures of my food, and at that time, it's a long story. We might get into it. I had a very unhealthy relationship with my body and food. Surprise, surprise. A teenage girl. But it really was kind of a way for me to essentially kind of have control over my food, and kind of micromanage and try to eat super clean and healthy and all of that stuff. So it didn't really start out with good intentions, but the Lord can, redeem everything. And so I ended up, we had a social media project in college in one of my nutrition education classes. And I was like, I'm literally already doing this. So I kind of use that as oh, well, I can maybe do this in a different kind of perspective and not just make it, a food log of what I'm eating. And then about that same time, I had a lot of friends and family that were like, we want to see more of like what you're eating, like, and just had requested like more nutrition information. I was like, okay, fine. I'm just going to tell people about it. So, told them about the private Instagram account. And it was like somehow connected to Facebook. So people already knew it was me. So yeah, I was like, great. This is super wonderful. Private account, but it's not private.
And at that time, when you're like just doing something for fun, it still feels embarrassing. I don't
It was,
know if you felt embarrassed.
yes.
Even
Oh,
to this day, I feel embarrassed,
mortified,
and
mortified.
okay.
And it was like that time, it was like 2012, 2013 when like taking pictures of your food was weird. No one liked it. It was taboo. And here it was, a whole freaking account of food. um, but anyway, so I've kept the Instagram up the whole time. The Instagram I have today literally is the same account. But working in the hospital, it was not my passion. I did not love it. I didn't want to be there full time. And so during COVID, we had some changes and switch ups, and I had the opportunity to leave and start working part time in another job. And the doctor that I worked with, and I still work with him now, really encouraged me to like kind of step out and start my own business, Redemptive Health. Prior to that, it really kind of was just like a hobby of sharing on Instagram and doing some things here and there. But that's kind of the fruition of Redemptive Health and kind of how I decided to start my own business. I did not like really go in with the intention of having my own business. It kind of fell into my lap. And it's honestly something that it's really hard, and I honestly
Yeah.
related a lot to a lot of my clients, like, trying to cultivate, a health routine or make changes in their health or kind of get the ball rolling. It's like when you're working towards a goal, like I can relate to them in so many ways with running, building, growing a business, figuring it all out. It's a lot of hard work. So yeah.
It is hard. It is hard. And I think any young woman, and especially any young woman going through athletics, you don't realize what kind of relationship or trusting or distrusting relationship you have with your body, whether that's in a physical capacity, whether that's with food, or whether that's how your mom talked about food or your grandma talked about food. Once you start getting into those years, like in college, and you start kind of separating yourself from that, you realize, ooh, and you have to cook for yourself. It kind of all comes to a bit of a head,
Yeah.
and it makes you realize what kind of relationship you have with food. So you kind of alluded to it, but can you, or are you willing to talk about that kind of phase in your life and what things you found out about your relationship with food?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had a terrible relationship with food. And it started off like really innocent. Like I just wanted to I think I was like a junior in high school, and I just remember like one evening or one morning I woke up after spending the night with some friends, and we had eaten like a ton of Oreos. And I woke up and I was like, I feel terrible. Like if food could make me feel bad, like it can probably make me feel good. And I admittedly like wanted to lose weight. And so that's kind of what started the whole kind of spiral. To my memory, I don't really remember my mom ever talking about like dieting or food being good or bad or anything like that. I did love reading like all of the women's health and self magazines and things like
Me
that.
too.
So I think that
Mhm.
definitely played into it. It's like follow this 1,500 calorie beach booty plan, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I definitely did not have a great relationship with food or my body. I was very active. I did enjoy moving, but I also used it as like punishment or, to cancel out whatever I ate. Focused a lot on eating, clean or staying under this, 1,200 calorie range. But then I would find myself eating like 4 bowls of Special K chocolatey delight cereal on my family's couch at like 9 p.m. And I'm like, why can't I stop eating the cereal? And it's like, in hindsight, I'm like, well, you probably just didn't eat but like 400 calories all day, Clara. But
Yeah.
yeah, and then it just kind of fueled or kind of spiraled even more in college. I never really did like it was just such a focus and hyperfixation on eating clean and always wanting to lose weight and being skinnier. And a lot of it for me was also kind of rooted in like approval and not having a good outlet for dealing with hard emotions. Like if I felt like left out from a friend group, I would turn to food. And then, you just add that on top of already not eating enough and over exercising and not sleeping well. Well, of
Yeah.
course you're going to overeat and binge on all of these like quote unhealthy foods and then feel terrible about yourself physically and mentally. And then you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. Now I've got to eat clean and start over all again. And then the cycle continues. So that was kind of a little bit of my background. um,
Yeah, but I'm sure those are the things that you're connecting with your clients on now. Because I was going to ask you, do you feel like most women are still in that rigmarole?
yeah, yeah. I think it's either like, I think a lot of them like feel just out of control around food. They
Hmm.
think they would be happier if they were smaller or lost weight. And they're just stuck in this like dieting mentality of like less is better, less food is
Hmm.
better, more movement is better. Staying within like a 1,200 calorie range, eating as little as possible, eating as clean as possible. Eating out is going to derail me. Like, and it's just
Yeah.
these things that I'm just like, I can see myself, I can in them, and I just want to like give them a hug and like sit on the same side of the table with them and just be like, it does not have to be this way. Like there is a better way to eat and move and live your life.
Hmm. Do you feel like women nowadays are still kind of stuck in that cycle? Or I almost kind of think that now, because there's so much nutrition information out there, women don't know what to do next.
Yeah.
And they're kind of, what's it called? They're like paralyzed with information, for
Oh yeah.
better or for worse. And I think I do have to realize sometimes, because I have a background in this and you have a background in this, it can
Mhm.
be easy to like read a new book, filter through it and be like, agree with that, don't agree with that. And then you take the information and you move on. Whereas I
Yeah.
think, I'm curious if you think that like women that don't have that kind of background, there's so many books nowadays on so many styles of eating and dieting that they're paralyzed with information. So I'm
Mhm.
curious if you feel like women are paralyzed with their next step, or if they are still kind of stuck in like the 90s and early 2000s of 1200 calorie eating. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I honestly think it's both. I see both. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes it's like maybe one woman struggles with one more than the other, but I do think there's kind of like a marrying of the two. Because it is so true, especially with like if it's not like a book, it's social media, it's a podcast,
Yeah.
it's some diet that they saw a friend do or something. And it's like I think actually, yeah, a common thing I hear is like there is so much information out there. I'm overwhelmed. I
Mhm.
don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. And so I do nothing. Or like we revert back to the whole dieting mentality that they grew up in because it's familiar. Yeah, it's not getting them anywhere, but it's familiar. And so they just keep going back to that because they don't know what to do. Um, and it's just, yeah, the overwhelm and the analysis paralysis and um, just it's like one person says to go carnivore and then the other person says, no, you need to like cut out red meat. Red meat's terrible for a woman, or, it's, as well. And it's just, they don't know how to siphon out all
Mhm.
of that information. And that's such a good point of like, it's such common knowledge to us. And we kind of
Mhm.
have that, that we know how to filter through the information that we're reading and being like, this is
Mhm.
like bogus baloney. No, thank you. Or like, oh, this has some merit to it. Or like, oh yeah, I can see how this approach could work, but like based on my goals, based on my values, it's not going to work for me. And I don't really want to even waste my time trying that.
Mhm.
So I'm not going to. And I'm done thinking about it. But for clients,
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm like, oh my gosh, they like literally don't even know what a carbohydrate is. Like,
Like,
we've
of course they're gonna be confused.
yeah, we've got some ground to cover. So yeah.
Totally. So I would love to know, like, what's your first step? Let's take that classic woman, was reading Vogue magazine in the 90s and early 2000s. She's on the binge and restrict cycles. She's all over the place. What's your first step when you're working with her?
Yeah. First, honestly, it kind of depends on the person, but I'll take one approach is honestly just, it sounds so simple and maybe a little complex to them, but explaining like the difference between like your basal metabolic rate and total daily energy expenditure. Because
Mhm.
like women don't understand, like you're burning a heck of a lot of calories, honey. Right?
Mhm.
Like when I explain to them your basal metabolic rate with you laying in bed doing absolutely nothing for 24 hours, you're probably burning 13, 14, 1500 calories doing nothing. And yet you're trying to
Yeah.
live off of 900 calories a day and live your life and take care of your kids and work out and work a full-time job. No wonder you're exhausted and no wonder you're going to the Ben and Jerry's every night.
Mhm.
It's not a lack of willpower. It's a lack of freaking nutrition. And so
Mhm.
like giving them that information of
Mhm.
like basal metabolic rate is the bare minimum requirement that you need to be eating. You need to be eating more than that, even if your goal is weight loss. And then kind of
Mhm.
juxtaposing that with their TDEE based on their
Mhm.
activity levels, how they're eating, their age, and all of that stuff, and showing them like, this is how much you need to eat. And then I usually will have them do a food log. And then I can tell very quickly. I'm like, okay, based on the food log that you just showed me, you actually need to be eating more food. And then
Mhm.
explaining to them, kind of going back to comparing the BMR, the TDEE, like why. This is specifically why. And it's not just about calories. It's not just about
Mhm.
calories. We've got the different macronutrients. And again, this goes to laying the groundwork, foundation of like actually understanding more about nutrition than just following a diet, eating a nutrition bar, eating a diet bar for 2 meals and then eating sensibly for your third meal a day. That doesn't teach you anything. Absolutely
Yeah.
nothing. And so I've had a lot of clients come to me from programs like that, and they don't know the difference between like the role that protein plays compared to carbs and fat, and why it's not just about calories, but it's also how those calories are distributed to,
Mhm.
you know, have good energy, to regulate your blood sugar, to even lose weight and or lose fat if that's your goal. And so really getting them to understand first and foremost like how their body works and what it actually needs. Um, and then we can go into like, their thoughts and beliefs, which I think is a whole thing. Um, because my pastor says we always act like who we think we are. And so it's really kind of, we have to reprogram and download new software. And that takes some time, but those are kind of the two ways that I typically go.
Yeah, I love that. I'm curious your spiel that you talk with clients when you're taking that first step with them about explaining, hey, I know that you're unhappy with your body composition and ideally you would want to lose fat mass, but we need to eat more calories first. That dichotomy that I always have to explain to people can always be really difficult, especially for women.
Yeah.
So we can say obviously it's your metabolism, but like how and you can kind of tie in maybe that thought process, like you said, new software, new programming in their brain, but how do you approach that difficult question that they give you, like
Yeah.
how is eating more food going to make me lose weight?
Yeah. Um, it is hard. And I think that's where, I find a lot of resistance, which I totally get. I have to kind of put myself in their shoes and think, okay, well, if I was in a body that I was extremely uncomfortable in and want to lose weight, and this girl who isn't overweight is telling me that I need to be eating more, and I feel like every time I do eat more, I gain weight, then like, of course I'm going to have some kind of resistance to that. But what I think as I've described it to clients, they, you can hear my small child.
I love it.
Um, But as I describe it to clients, and I always tell them, like, you can take agency over your own health. If I tell you something and you don't jive with it, you don't have to act on it, right? Like, you are an
Mhm.
adult, you can say yes or no. I do encourage them to look at it like an experiment, right? It's like try it for 2 weeks. And then if you don't feel like it works, then we can try something else. Because I really do think when people take ownership over their health rather than just being told what to do, it gives
Mhm.
them that ownership and the autonomy. But explaining that, it and looking at it as like, okay, honestly, the route that you're going, eating less and less and less, you've tried that before, have we not? And they're all like, yes, yes, I have. This is, kind of the cycle that I've done. And I'm like, okay, well, if it hasn't worked, then why are we going to keep doing the same thing?
Mhm.
And I'm like, are you ready, willing, and able to try something different? And if they're not ready, willing, and able to try something different, then like, okay, well, this might not be a good fit, right?
Mhm.
I need you to have an open mind. I need you to just kind of honestly have some trust, which, can obviously take time. Um, but I typically will honestly explain it to them kind of like the whole, how your metabolism will adapt of like, okay, well, if you have been consistently eating less and less and less food over years, if you have been chronically dieting for 20 years, your body has
Mhm.
adapted to need less food. Um, and I'll use an example of say your favorite restaurant, they lose half of their employees, right? Well, they can't run the same restaurant on half of the employee or a third of the employee base. And so what do? Maybe they close early. Maybe they're closed for a couple days where maybe they were open 7 days before. Maybe they had a killer pastry selection, but the pastry chef went, so now they don't offer pastries. And so they kind of like have to turn the lights off on some of the core offerings that they once offered because they don't have the resources they need to actually run the business fully. And that's kind of what happens in your body when you don't give it what it needs. And for a lot of people, they're kind of, it clicks, especially, post COVID, they're like, oh yeah, I get it. I get when, restaurants shut down because they didn't have the staff to work.
Yeah.
And so that kind of helps them start to think a little bit differently of like, okay, well, yeah, I guess that does make sense. And when we look at like, food literally is fuel, calories are energy. We can retrain your body to be able to use it more. And when we're focusing on eating foods that actually support it, you're going to feel better. But there is a level of trust, especially when you're doing something new and different. Change is really, really freaking
Mhm.
uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the concept of trust because that's kind of a phrase that I try to reiterate a lot of the times. It's like when women are on this binge and restrict cycle, they don't trust in themselves that they can make a correct decision. They don't trust that they can be consistent. So they put everything in an all or nothing basket. They're like, if I just up the ante, then I'll do it. But then
Yep.
when they up the ante and then they still don't have any trust with themselves, then they don't do it, then everything comes crumbling down and then it just kind of cycles back into it. And so I always say, like, you have to stop with the all or nothing and we have to start stringing small moments of trust together.
Yes.
And that's the consistency. So I wanted to segue that to you and hit that question back to you. Is like, what do you feel like is the biggest hurdle in consistency when it comes to fitness and or food?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, first off, I just want to say yes to stringing small wins together. And I think this is definitely one of them. I did not even list
Mhm.
this out, but this is for sure one of them is we want the big wins right away and quick.
Mhm.
We are not satisfied with the quote small wins, right? We're not
Mhm.
satisfied with like hitting our protein intake or um, going for a 20-minute walk every day. Like we're
Mhm.
not satisfied with doing these small things because they don't feel like enough. Or we get to the end of the
Mhm.
week, we step on the scale and oh my gosh, the number hasn't moved. Like it's not working. It's not happening fast enough. And
Mhm.
so I love the concept of like small wins, and really looking at it as like a brick by brick mentality. Like, and it's the whole, I think a a lot of health practitioners, we use the whole phrase of like building a strong foundation. Um,
Mhm.
and I mean, it is so true. It's like, why are you going to focus and spend $500 on like a nice leather couch for your living room if the house is going to fall apart? Like, why are you going to waste your time, your money, and your effort on that leather couch when your house comes crumbling down? Build the foundation with these small wins, and that builds your confidence. But I digress. To answer your question, um, biggest hurdles in staying consistent with like fitness
Mhm.
or nutrition, whatnot. Definitely the all or nothing thinking. My goodness, the all or nothing thinking. It's like, if I can't do everything perfectly, then just screw it. Like, I'll just kind of blow it now and then start again on Monday or start again next month. And it's, I think of it honestly as like, okay, so you're trying to be perfect. And I don't know about you, but as a believer, like, we're not going to be perfect this side of heaven. The only perfect person is Jesus. And he was perfect for you and me. So we don't have to actually be perfect with all of this stuff. Okay.
Mhm.
But all or nothing thinking for sure. I also think quitting too soon.
Mhm.
I think a lot of women will start something and they'll be super motivated, super excited, and they'll give it a go for maybe a couple of weeks, but then they feel like it's not working, and then they give up,
Mhm.
and then they feel defeated again. It's like another attempt where they failed, but like they didn't
Mhm.
fail, they just didn't give it time to actually work. It's like
Yeah.
they were like, I kind of think of it of like flirting, if like back in the dating scene, you're kind of
Mhm.
like flirting around with like different guys. You weren't ever like actually committed to one. And so if you're not actually ever committed, then like the relationship's not going to go anywhere. It's not going to work because you're not committed. And so I think a lot of women, they just quit too soon and they short circuit like the feeling of actually accomplishing something.
Mhm.
Um, and then I think another one is, um, again, just kind of going back to like identity and how they think about themselves, and
Mhm.
like what they think they're capable of. Again, like I said, my pastor always says we always act like who we think we are. There's I think he might just be like a motivational speaker. I don't know, but Dr. Dennis Waitley says we always move in the direction of our most dominant thought. And so I
Mm.
think a
That's
lot of
good.
times women, um, like they've strung these, time after time, attempt after attempt at trying to change, and they've quit too soon or they feel like it didn't work. And so they stack that up as like, oh, I don't have what it takes. I'm just not cut out for this. This doesn't work. It's not worth the effort. They don't see themselves as someone who can wake up early to work out or even just work out consistently or enjoy meal planning or something like that. And so they're literally yoking themselves to a false identity that is rooted like in something that is like a straight up lie, honestly, or it's like something that like the enemy has planted in their head, or maybe their like high school boyfriend said something about them, or their parents or their friends, and they are literally letting that become their identity. And I'm like,
Mhm.
as a believer, as a believer, you literally have the miracle working power of the Holy Spirit living inside of you. So, like, you literally do have the capacity to change. And you do have the capacity to be the type of person who can be consistent with working out, with eating healthy food, with like not just binging your emotions or whatnot, binging on food because of your emotions. But we yoke ourselves to this false old identity that honestly is like, I mean, as believers, we are literally a new creation. And so we are told to put off the old self. And that includes like how you identify yourself with your health, in my opinion. I'm not, I've never been to seminary or anything like that. So take that with a grain of salt, but, um, just my two.
No, gosh, no, gosh. I completely agree. Completely agree. It was really interesting for me when in my regular job, 99% of the people I'm working with are guys and it's in a performance setting. So
Yeah.
there's some moments where I'm able to talk to them kind of, it's not that dramatic, but like kind of heart to heart where they
Mhm.
are like telling me how they're feeling and I can kind of, as a coach, guide them in the right direction. But when I started working with women, a little bit more formally online, I realized that I could put together the best curriculum and teach them the best information, but all of their questions, all of their insecurities are rooted in not knowing their identity. And I think that's what makes you different on the internet. And I think that's what makes me different on the internet, is that you cannot, I don't know what it is about the physical appearance, but it points, maybe it's because we're made in the image of God. Who would have thought? It points back. Yeah, it points back to understanding your identity. And like you said, like, you are not, most women do not grasp the idea that, like, we are a new creation. And so if that is our biggest thought in our mind, we will run towards the direction of understanding, oh my gosh, I am a new creation. Wow. That is incredible. I'm going to walk forward in confidence. I'm going to walk forward with a backbone of steel because I know I have the saving power and the changing power of Christ in me. That is a totally different look
It's, yeah.
than that is a totally different look than I think. I'm not ragging on the church at all, but I think that's a totally different look. That's not a feminist look. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's not like this, it's not like, you know, ignorantly confident or arrogant, walking in that type of style. It's just more of like, that's a very different look than I think the average woman coming out of the modern American evangelical church. I'll just say that. And
For
the
sure.
ones that do walk in that confidence, man, I've got a woman here that kind of mentors me, and I tell her that all the time. I'm like, you walk
Mm.
knowing the saving power of Jesus Christ. Like, and everybody knows it,
Yeah.
and I just think that the way that she exudes that defines the way I think she stewards everything in her life,
Mm.
and I can use her as an example. And, like, it's stewarding our body, it's stewarding our kids, it's stewarding our home, it's stewarding the things that the Lord has put on our plate. And so I sometimes find it interesting that especially Christian women will really push forth and try really hard to steward their family and steward their homes in such beneficial ways, but they don't give a lot of biblical thought to how they steward themselves. And I'm
Yeah.
assuming you've seen similar, but I would love to hear your viewpoint of that.
Yeah. I mean, you literally nailed it on the head. It's a different confidence. I think it's like a quiet confidence almost. I don't even know like what I mean by that term. I feel like I've heard it, but
Yeah.
it sounds
Yeah,
nice. But
absolutely.
like not prideful, and it's honestly literally not based on anything you do, right? It's like
Mhm.
based on who you are and whose you are, and that gives you the confidence to be like I want to work out because I want to steward the one body that the Lord has entrusted to me. He literally
Mhm.
gave it to me to care for, to steward. And like, I want to take really good care of it out of like just a way to honor and glorify Him. I think of it so much like if a friend lets you borrow like a really nice dress for a wedding, like you're going to take such great care of it. And so, why
Mhm.
do we not take care of our bodies that way? Like, and not to just like gratify ourselves, but again, as like a way to honor and glorify the Lord of like, thank you for literally getting me out of bed, giving me lungs
Mhm.
that like allow me to breathe, quads and glutes that allow me to like squat and like get out of bed. Like I want to enjoy it. I want to honor you with it. And I don't think women look at their bodies like that or health like that. And I'm like, I don't know
Mhm.
like, what the getting that in their head, like
Mhm.
how to do it. It's like
I
because
know. I know.
over and I'm like maybe it's up to the Holy Spirit and I'm just planting seeds over here, but
Yeah.
it's having that like firm identity. And honestly, for me, I think that is when my health changed, like, and my approach to health really changed. And I was like, yeah, I'm going to look at food as like a way to honor and fuel my body. I'm not going to, and with that, I was able to actually fuel my body appropriately. So then I wasn't under eating during the day and then binging at night and then feeling like the scum of the earth. And then I enjoyed moving my body more. And I actually like saw my worth and value in Christ and took my emotions to Him. And it's
Mhm.
like what came first, the chicken or the egg? I don't really know, but I do know that the Lord was really gracious and
Mhm.
um, at the end of the day, it all is like to glorify him. It should be to glorify and honor him. Like that is our motive. And then out of
Mhm.
his goodness, like when we do that, oftentimes, not all of the time, it's not like the prosperity gospel, but a lot of times, like we will, improve our health. We might lose weight. We might improve our body composition as a result of living in alignment of who he says we are. I don't know if that even answered your question, but
No, absolutely. And I love the analogy that you use of the dress. And I've kind of heard that before. I had another friend, Lindsay, kind of mention something similar where it's like, going back to your dress analogy, it's like, okay, well, if you had two dresses that looked exactly the same, but one of them cost $10 and one of them cost $10,000,
yeah,
you would, because you're seeing the value in it, you're automatically not going to throw the $10,000 dress on the back of the couch. You're not going to let it get wrinkly. You're not going to, you're not going to just toss it if it has a stain. You're going to try and get the stain out. Whereas the $10 dress, you're like, man, it's wrinkled. I'll just buy a new one. Who freaking cares? But it's like, I think that's why it's always rooted in value, because if you look to Christ and you start understanding what he did for you and what the Imago Dei really means, oh my gosh, our bodies are worth
yeah,
10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 times, you know what I mean?
yeah,
Infinite amount. And that can almost feel a little claustrophobic because you're like, oh, I got to do everything perfect. But that's not what we're saying. We're saying that, like, obviously, Christ covers that and he gives us grace for the moments that we can't fulfill to be perfect. But it always, always, always comes down to value.
mhm,
Always. So I love that you use that dress analogy.
yeah.
Um, okay, so I'm going to ask you some more dietitian specific questions if you're ready for them.
See, see.
Perfect. I think it's a big hot topic, especially kind of in a more crunchy space,
Uh-huh.
on whether you should be labeling foods as good or bad. So let me hear your view of that and anything else that you want to kind of take it from there.
Oh, yeah, this is such a hard-hitting question. Yeah, is food
Mhm.
good or bad? This will really, break up the internet real quick.
Love it.
Um, so my practice, my philosophy, I honestly don't believe in like labeling food as good or bad. But like, let's be real. And I think we can all be real. Like, there are obviously foods that are going to be more health promoting and more beneficial than others. Like, we
Mhm.
can't, like, absolutely, for sure. And there's that Bible verse. It's like all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial.
Mhm.
And honestly, I use that as just kind of like a biblical like principle or like filter to honestly think about like my food choices of like, okay, literally everything is permissible. I can eat whatever the heck I want. But like, is this going to be beneficial for my body, my mind? Like, is this like filling the need that I feel like I have? Um,
Mhm.
and even looking at like, going back to kind of, is it good or bad? I think, a lot of times that can obviously lead into the more like restrictive mindset and mentality of like, okay, well, if it's bad, it's off limits and I can't eat it. And it's like, okay, well, that's telling a kid to not touch a hot stove. All they're going to want to do is like touch a hot stove. And so
Mhm.
if we just remove the label of if something is good or bad, it frees our brains up to like look at it not so like emotionally or morally driven. And it's like, okay,
Mhm.
like, can I eat, Oreos or cinnamon toast crunch or whatever? Yeah, for sure. Like, I'm not going to feel like I'm a bad person if I go to the grocery store after this podcast interview and get gluten-free Oreo double stuff, right? But at the same time, it's like, is that going to be beneficial? Probably not. Am I going to eat it
Mhm.
all the time? No. And I think again, to me, it's coming back to, I think it's just the morality and what we hinge our identity on. A lot of people hinge their identity on how good or bad they were that day with their eating. And again, it
Yeah.
gets back to value and identity. So, yeah. Yes.
Totally. Yeah, I think acknowledging, yeah, I know. Your baby thinks so too. It's always kind of interesting, I think even in again kind of like the crunchy-ish, food, maybe whole food, ancestral foods, well-rounded foods, don't cut out any food groups type of people on the internet, I think we can always go back to like food doesn't have any moral value, which really comes back to like whether it's good or bad or labeling. But it's interesting too, because there's kind of another step that's coming out that's saying, okay, it doesn't have moral value. We're not going to label it good or bad. But like you said, is it beneficial? Because I think there's some things that people would argue as like would typically label as bad. I'll give an exaggerated
Mhm.
example.
Yeah.
Artificial food dyes, hydrogenated oils, artificial sweeteners, things that we know are cancer causing agents
Yeah.
wreaking havoc, right? So
Yeah.
it's like it's like two sides of the same coin. It's like, okay, from an emotional and moral standpoint, hydrogenated oils are not morally bad,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it's certainly not beneficial.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just dicey. It's hard to sift through.
It is dicey, and I think a lot of it again comes from the morality and the identity piece, or like even like health disparity things. It's like, well, okay, well, what if someone can't afford,
Yeah.
I don't know, something that isn't made with seed oils or whatnot?
Hmm.
And it's like you make them feel guilty for them not being able to eat it. And it's like, no, like,
Yeah. Yeah. My gosh. Hmm. 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 Oh, girl, I just ate like a half a tub of what was it? Chicken salad yesterday. That had from the store, mayo, canola oil. So like it is what it is. Like you in my head I was like I'm eating protein, but then I'm like, I have a slight moment. It's like the second ingredient is canola oil. What are you doing, Kelsey? And I'm like, but I'm eating my protein goal. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. No, no, I agree. Totally agree. And I'm glad you brought up the WIC example because a lot of people bring up like that food disparity argument. Something that's kind of interesting is actually at the beginning of the year, the next year in January. I'm putting together kind of I'm partnering with a local pregnancy center, and I'm basically doing a 6-week series, 3 weeks of like at home exercise and like what that can look like. And then 3 weeks of, I call it like, it's a health and wellness series, but basically it's like, how can women who are typically in lower income WIC, that have typically are on food stamps, how can they make practical, applicable changes in their diet so that they're not having to grab the juice boxes? And like, what does that look like? And I've noticed that the biggest, I think, one of the bigger gaps outside of just what type of food the government is willing to pay for them, which is typically like obviously government subsidized, like big food, it's just a education gap on how to prepare foods, how to prepare very simple foods. So, have you seen that in your own practice as a dietitian? Is like people just don't know how to cook for themselves? Or is it like legit, like out of convenience, they don't know how to cook for themselves, so they're grabbing all this junk? Or like, do you get what I'm saying? Like, do you feel like people just don't know how to cook and they don't have kitchen skills? Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah, I'm sure. I also think too, at least on my end, on a personal note, I remember getting married and thinking that I had to make a recipe and I had to get all these ingredients, And now I'm like, heck no, I'm not doing a recipe. I'm just getting staple meats, staple starch, staple veg, and some fruit and like plug and play. And like, yeah, yeah. Oh my god, Claire, we're literally the same person. On my Crunchy company, like on my member site, I post like quote unquote meal plans and people are like, "How do I cook this?" And I'm like, literally in the instructions, literally a table. It says like 5 ounce salmon, half cup rice. Like that's it. And I'm like, I want you to learn how to air fry a piece of salmon and cook some rice in an instant pot. I don't care what sauce you put on it. I don't care what seasoning you put on it. Just look at your sauces, make sure it doesn't have canola oil, like me, little hypocrite. Just, just slap a spice on there and eat it. And it's like, I've had some people kind of push back because they wanted more direction. And I've had a lot of people being like, wow, this is like actually so easy. I'm like, just brown some ground beef and put some coconut aminos on it. Like, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, and I'm like, no, we need to learn how to have some basic kitchen skills and not feel so tied to a recipe. And I also recognize like maybe some husbands like want recipes, so I know there's probably a dynamic there, but I say keep it simple. Hmm. Exactly. Okay, in your opinion, is it typically an argument of in moderation, so volume of food, or is it typically an argument of type of food? So, for example, is the argument, let's use ice cream for example, is the argument buy better ingredient ice cream? That would be type of food. Or moderation, no, just grab the Ben and Jerry's, but you're going to have 2 bites of it. Does that make sense? So, like, where do you typically land? Okay. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Or maybe they won't feel good afterwards. Yeah, maybe they won't feel good afterwards. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. You mentioned eating hygiene, and I love that. I've never had a label like kind of thrown out there like that. So, in a perfect scenario, 100% perfect scenario, Clara is making dinner for the baby. The baby is now what, 5 years old or something. With you and your husband and the baby. Um, Talk to me about like perfect eating hygiene. Like we can all make small steps to get there, but I'm assuming you're going to talk about like you said eating right and like I don't know, maybe it's things like setting the table or making something homemade or I don't know. So give us your dietitian's view of eating hygiene. Mhm. 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 Oh my gosh, it's so applicable. So, as you know, I just had my crazy Peruvian adventure. Um, but okay, so two parts of this story that kind of tie into what you're saying. On the front end of my South American vacation, we were at a lodge in the Amazonian rainforest, and there were a couple other travelers that were there with us, and we were eating kind of family style. And I noticed in myself how quickly I finished my plate versus everybody else. And I sat there in the Amazon rainforest, surrounded by monkeys and parrots. And what am I doing? Scarfing my food. And I was thinking, "Oh my gosh, Kelsey, like, I knew I was kind of a fast eater, and I think that kinda comes from athletics because you're just, like, slamming food and then going to the next thing." And I'm like, "Kelsey, I'm almost 30 years old, and I cannot like, this tension I feel when I see food on my plate, I'm like, this alone will make me overeat my food because I'm so focused on my plate rather than my company that's around me and, like, the present moment, and so, I noticed that in myself, first of all, and then second was when I had my emergency appendectomy, and then I was in a Peruvian hospital, and I was trying to get myself to eat a little bit more food, I was talking with a US nurse on the phone, and she was like, "We really need you to chew your food a lot to help with the digestion, um, as you're kind of recovering." So I had, like, mashed potatoes, and I just, like, held the mashed potatoes, like, in my mouth, and Clara, I could not hold those potatoes in my mouth for longer than, like, 5 seconds, because then I would have, like, a physical reaction to swallow the food, and I was like, "Wow, this really confirms what I was feeling at when we were back in the Amazon." Because I was like, "My body has, like, a physical reaction when seeing the food, and I need to really personally practice, like, sitting there with food on my plate and just kind of taking one bite at a time or even maybe setting my fork down in between each bite rather than just keeping the fork in my hand and just like shoveling food. I can just like one bite, set the fork down, chew, 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 and do that one at a time. I'm personally trying to work on that. So I'm glad you brought that up. Hmm. Hmm. Totally. Totally. So many applicable. What's that? Literally in the hospital, I couldn't do anything else, but I could chew my food. I could leave the mashed potatoes in my mouth. You're right. That's so funny. Well, Clara, thank you so much for giving us your time today. I feel like you gave us so many applicable things, and I'm just like so glad that we're on the same page about so many things in regards to Christians understanding their value and how we need to, keep forth on our health journey out of stewardship and not out of guilt. So I just appreciate you being here today. Yes. I need to come out to Asheville. I need to come see you. I will let you know. Yeah, my brother's about to have a baby, so I'm sure I'll make it out there to see the baby. Mhm. Perfect. Well, have a great night, Clara. We'll talk soon. Bye.